Hello, Judge, and hello, my opponent. I will begin by addressing the points made by the proposition and then reaffirm the points made in my constructive as to why prisons should not be abolished and why reform is the better option. My opponent continues to try to convince you that lobbyists are a big problem. He claims that private prisons invested millions to get lobbyists to push to increase sentences and incarcerate more people in order to maximize profits. Firstly, my opponent's plan for abolition will not solve for the harms of lobbyists and capitalists abusing the system. They will just find a new way of oppressing people for profit, just like how after slavery was abolished, the poor slaves had no choice but to be exploited and to work for unfair low pay for the same slave owners, and then the Jim Crow laws following after that. Secondly, the article he cites only applied to immigration detention, and while it is true that there was lobbying going on, the article itself said that the lobbying failed. It did not work for the two large private prisons that my opponent claims spent millions of dollars on lobbying, because the immigration law that they lobbied for in Arizona was still invalidated, meaning that these millions of dollars were wasted. In the eyes of a money-hungry corporation, as my opponent portrays them to be, losing millions of dollars is a bad investment, and they will hence be deterred from continuing these practices if these failures continue. My opponent also brings in a new argument about criminals in prisons becoming deeply intertwined in the criminal world. But according to Stanton E. Samhow, PhD of psychology today, just as in the free world, an inmate chooses the people with whom he develops close associations. He makes decisions about the type of person he wants to be. He decides what temptations he will resist. By no means is it inevitable that he will become a more hardened or hardened criminal or a dangerous person because he is serving a sentence in a correctional institution. I understand, though, that the possibility of becoming a more hardened criminal can be bad, but the more catastrophic problem would be abolishing prisons and simultaneously allowing not only these newly intertwined criminals, but the murderers, the rapists, and the racist prison gangs that turn them this way back into society as well, free to wreak havoc without fear of repercussions, and free to intertwine the non-felon population with the criminal world, possibly increasing the harm by tenfold. My opponent brings up the accomplishment of Texas with the prison entrepreneurship program and how it costs less than building prisons, so money can be used in education to reduce chances of incarceration and that the crime rate has dropped. I would like to firstly respond by saying that the amount of money that will actually be put into education will only be minimal at best when considering the millions of dollars that the U.S. would have to put into hiring new police officers, security, and into expensive high-tech surveillance technologies in order to keep the community safe now that over 2 million criminals without jobs, and 68% of whom don't have at least a high school diploma, are releasing and walking in the streets without fear of going back to prison because it has been abolished. Secondly, that program is clearly not mutually exclusive from prisons. We can still have prisons and have the program. In fact, according to their website, the program currently happens in prison and post-release, not as a replacement to prison. That is what is happening in Texas, and according to my opponent, they have fast-falling crime rates. So if it is currently working with prisons and changing the system to make it better, it falls under the category of reform, which is what I'm proposing to do as opposed to abolition. My opponent says that reforms have been implemented for decades, and he also repeatedly says that they are correlational and minimal at best. First of all, the word correlation means that there is a relation existing between two things in which they tend to be associated or occur together in a way not based on chance alone. So yes, they have been reforms implemented for decades, and yes, there is a correlation between reform and crime, but the effects have been far from minimal, evident by the over 50% drop in recidivism rate due to educational reform in Oklahoma, and the 5.8% decrease in the imprisonment rate in the past 5 years, and by the 14% drop in the crime rate nationwide. At least these reforms are showing positive impacts as opposed to what the proposition is proposing. Because again, my opponent has still not suggested any alternative that could take the place of prisons other than the Texas program, which is not mutually exclusive from prisons. The reforms worked in Oklahoma, and the reform worked in Texas. So if they continue to be expanded, they can work for the entire country. So you cannot vote for the abolition of prisons if the proposition's plan not only does not solve for the harms of lobbyists exploiting people, nor the more important harm of the threat to public safety, but also has the grave possibility of making the harm even worse. So please vote for the neg. Please vote for the society without rapists, murderers, and racist prison gangs wreaking havoc in society without fear of retribution.